Welcome, everyone, to this briefing brought to you by the Israel Defense and Security Forum, IDSF. In Hebrew, our name is Abitchonistim. IDSF is a leading Israeli organization advocating for strong national security to defend Israel. Thank you, of course, to all our viewers. Thank you to all of our supporters for tuning into this briefing to allow us to bring you behind the headlines what is really happening here on the ground in Israel. It's a great pleasure to be joined today by Brigadier General Amir Avivi, the founder and chairman of IDSF. General, thank you so much for joining.
A pleasure.
So, General, Sunday morning was a major development in this war here in Israel, with Israel launching a preemptive strike on Hezbollah. What more can you tell us about that event?
So basically, since Israel targeted Shuker, the chief of staff of Hezbollah, Hezbollah has said that they are going to retaliate. They waited for a while. Israel was very, very alert. The forces were ready and monitoring all the time what Hezbollah is doing. And at the end of the day, Hezbollah decided they are going to basically do two things. One, launch a very, very large attack of short-range rockets to the north. And by launching all these rockets, really get our radars occupied and send UAVs deep into Israel to the base of Glilot. Glilot, there are several units, and the A200 among them, and try to hit Glilot, which is just north of Tel Aviv. I think the idea was do something meaningful, but in a way that won't get Israel to understand that there is a full-scale war and go into a full-scale war. Israel was really monitoring everything that Hezbollah was doing. At the moment there was an understanding that they're about to attack, Israel launched a preemptive attack with 100 airplanes and targeted most of the rocket launchers, destroyed thousands of rockets, and also the UAVs that Hezbollah sent. Hezbollah managed to shoot around 200 rockets, so the IDF probably didn't destroy everything. All this attack was in South Lebanon, and everything was in an overall situation where we're still on the defense in the north. I mean, this is an act of defense. It's not a full-scale war. It's not an offensive attack of the IDF all over Lebanon and against all installations of Hezbollah. It was an attack that was intended to foil this specific attack that Hezbollah was about to launch. And both the Ministry of Defense and the Prime Minister said, we are still on the offensive in Gaza and on the defense in the north. Israel hasn't changed its basic strategy yet, a strategy that was set on the 7th of October.
General, are you able to elaborate a little bit about the freedom operation that the Israeli Air Force has in southern Lebanon and the types of aircraft that they used? Was this a major display of force? Was this only a small percentage of Israel's capabilities?
So I think that, I don't remember when the IDF attacked with 100 airplanes. It's a major display of force. IDF basically in the last 10 months destroyed most of Hezbollah's air defense in Lebanon and created a full freedom of operation for the Air Force in Lebanon. It's something we didn't have in the last few years because of very sophisticated capabilities that Hezbollah brought from Iran. So I think in this attack we saw the dominance of Israel, talking about the intelligence and what we know about Hezbollah, and also the operational capability to synchronize 100 airplanes at the same time that attack multiple targets. It's a very, very complicated thing to do. I think it was done very well, and it shows something that I have been talking about for a long time, that while Israel is on the defense, we're not really showing the extent of the capabilities of the Air Force and the IDF. We keep the fight along the border on a low fire, trying not to bring it into full-scale war yet. But when the IDF will go to war, then the full power of the Air Force and the IDF will be shown, and it's on a completely different magnitude than anything we saw until now. Now we had the chance maybe to see a small example of what the Air Force can do.
And with this small example, does it create any level of deterrence with Hezbollah, or is Hezbollah going to go back to the drawing board, back to any operations that they're planning, and they're not worried that the IDF, the Israeli Air Force, was able to be so successful?
Well, I think they are certainly concerned by really the level of intelligence that the IDF has, by the fact that we toppled a lot of their leadership in the last 10 months, including the chief of staff, but also the commanders of all the major forces of Hezbollah in the south, the commander of Aziz force, of Nasser force, of Badr force. These are the three, say, brigades or divisions that are along the Israeli-Lebanese border. Badr is a bit north of the Litani. And other operatives also in Syria. So Hezbollah understands that they are penetrated. They are worried about that, but they are not deterred. They started shooting back already today. There is a Hezbollah attacks along the border.
And when I've spoken with residents up north in the past, they're very concerned about an infiltration similar to that happened on October 7th. Did we see any of that on Sunday? Any plans for that the Israeli military was able to deflect, or that wasn't in the cards at all?
There are big tunnels in South Lebanon with thousands of terrorists that are able to get close to the border and storm Israeli towns. But doing that again, like it happened in the south, it's a full-scale war. And Hezbollah hasn't reached the point yet that they're willing to have a full-scale war. And this is why they were not planning to attack with its forces. But it doesn't mean they won't do that later on. We have to be alert and understand that we have enemies that want to destroy us. They're not going to give up. And the big question is, who will attack first? This is crucial. We cannot have another 7th of October. We need to be proactive. We need a 6-day war scenario, not a Yom Kippur war scenario. And we need to be ready to go on the offensive. And I think that we reached the point where in Gaza, we have set the terms for the destruction of Hamas. Hamas eventually will be destroyed. It's not posing a very big threat as it did before. And we can really shift the center of gravity from the south to the north. But to do that, the cabinet needs to change the strategy. It needs to decide on goals of war and set a clear strategy that shifts the center of gravity to the north and declares a war and offensive in the north.
Now, there seems to be a bit of tension, to put it lightly, between the residents of the north and the people making the decisions in this war about the failure to take Sunday and turn it into a full-scale offensive against Hezbollah to allow the residents of the north to return to their homes. Where do you weigh in on that issue? Was it a missed opportunity? Should we be celebrating about what happened on Sunday, or bemoaning the fact that it wasn't the beginning of a return process?
I think that at this point we should have launched a full-scale attack on Hezbollah. I think that the citizens in the north are very angry because for the first time in the last 10 months, they see actually what the IDF can do. And they're asking themselves, if this is what you're able to do, why aren't you doing that? And the government is saying, we are focusing on the south and not on the north. But everybody understands that in the south, we are very close to reaching the goals of war. And even if we take some of the forces north, we are still able to continue and destroying Hamas. But the government might say, We need to keep the military pressure in the south because this is how we'll get the hostages, and the hostages are a high priority. And we need the forces. We need them to continue pressuring Hamas until we get the hostages. It's a good excuse. And it's a serious consideration. And also the fact that we need international legitimacy, and Israel wants to show that we're doing everything possible to get a diplomatic solution that will get Hezbollah to withdraw from South Lebanon. But frankly, the chances are very low that this will happen. But Israel still needs to show that they're trying to, they're supporting a resolution. But they need to put a time frame. Say to the US, okay, guys, you have 1 more month, 2 months. We cannot wait anymore. We have tens of thousands of citizens that cannot go back home. And we need to do something about that. And this is the tough decisions that the cabinet and the prime minister need to take.
Now, no doubt there are diplomatic reasons not to have an all-out offensive in the north. There are international political reasons, but just from an operational perspective, as a general in the IDF, knowing the capabilities of the IDF and fighting on multiple fronts, is now the opportune time, just from an operational perspective, to attack full scale with Hamas? I'm sorry, with
Definitely.
Hezbollah.
From an operational point of view, this is the time to launch a full-scale attack on Hezbollah, and if needed, also on Iran, and create the terms to bring back our citizens safely home. And to do that, we need to push Hezbollah out of South Lebanon. We need to destroy huge parts of Hezbollah capabilities all over Lebanon. If they shoot centers of Israel infrastructure, we need to destroy Lebanese infrastructure. And by doing that, we'll create really a completely different reality in the north, and we'll be able to bring back our citizens safely home. And this is something that must happen. We cannot have a reality where tens of thousands of Israelis cannot go back home, or a reality where the whole economy of the north is being destroyed and the towns are being wrecked. It's not a sustainable reality for the short and long period of time.
And what does it look like right now in southern Lebanon in terms of the presence of residents south of the Litani River? Is it a ghost town right now? Are they preparing for war, or is it business as usual?
In many of the towns in South Lebanon, approximately 90% of the people left and they moved north of the Litani. And unlike Israel, where we take our citizens to nice hotels or hire for them apartments, in Lebanon, obviously, the people who left are not taken care of. And so there is pressure inside Lebanon, and the Lebanese are terrified from a war. They understand what will happen. And certainly after seeing what the IDF did yesterday, this only creates more stress, inside the Lebanese society. And the Lebanese society is not Gaza. Gaza is all Hamas. Everybody is Hamas because this is the way they were brought up. But in Lebanon, you have different groups. You have Christians, you have Maronis, you have Sunnis, you have Druze. Many of them detest Hezbollah. So there are different opinions and interests in Lebanon. And many of them don't want a war. And they feel that Hezbollah is dragging them together with Iran to a very complicated and challenging war.
I think it was last week you suggested that Hamas wants Israel to be dragged into a war with Hezbollah and Iran. It's in Hamas's best interest. Is it in Hezbollah's best interest? Is Hezbollah trying just not to go above a certain threshold? Or do you think Hezbollah is almost waiting for the opportunity for a full-scale war and they're ready to do it?
I think that definitely from Hamas side, Sinwar wants a regional war, or even a global one, thinking like in Armageddon terms. For Iran and Hezbollah, it's a big question. I think that they think that this time frame now until the election in the US might be a good time for them to attack Israel, understanding that the US is busy with elections. They don't know how the elections will end. They don't know who will be president. They have to take in account that if Trump is elected, maybe the whole policy will change and not for the best for them. So we need to bring back the citizens. They might also want and need a war. So I think the chances of a full-scale war are very, very high.
I want to thank all of our viewers who are sending in questions in our live Zoom chat, sending them to my email, to my WhatsApp, getting all of those questions out in general. There's a question a lot of people are asking, which is if there were to be a negotiated deal with Hamas and it were to include the ability for Sinwar to escape Gaza, to stay alive at the end of this war, what are your thoughts on that?
I think that if Sinwar says, I'm giving you all the hostages and I want to stay alive and I want to leave Gaza, Israel will agree to that, providing that we get the hostages. Israel is not going to agree to stop the war until there is a complete surrender for Hamas operatives. They give up all their weapons and stop fighting. Then we can look at a new reality in Gaza. But Israel is willing to do a lot to get the hostages. What we're not willing to do is let Hamas rebuild itself. We're not willing to stop the war if Hamas is continuing to try to rebuild and fight. But other than that, Israel is open, I think, to this kind of ideas.
Now, there still seems to be a lot of discussion about the Philadelphia corridor. Is that really a discussion point right now? There is a strong potential that the IDF removes itself from the Philadelphia corridor in the day after scenarios?
As I was driving back home, I was listening to a very interesting podcast with Gal Hirsch. Gal Hirsch has been leading all the issue of the hostages from day one, from the beginning of the war, and it's the first time he interviews, and he did that in a long podcast, and he said very interesting things, and he's of course really, really into the details, and he said all along, the only ones who don't want to deal is Hamas. He said what I'm saying all the time on the media, that the real interest of Hamas are two things. One, they want a regional war. And therefore, they don't want a deal. They want to bring the region to a war. And also that they want the Israeli society to be divided, and they want to see demonstrations. And the way they are getting that is by not releasing hostages. Because if they do release hostages, obviously, there will be nothing to demonstrate about. So getting a deal is not in Hamas' interest, and therefore, Philadelphia is not necessarily the one thing that prevents a deal. Take from the most basic stance, Hamas doesn't want a deal, and they gave 29 different comments, all of them very serious, on the agreed deal that the US and Israel and Egypt and Qatar agreed upon. So when you have 29 different reservations, you basically don't want a deal.
So Hamas doesn't want a deal, and somehow a deal with Hamas seems to be the tipping point for escalations up in the north. Are we going to be in this holding pattern forever, that in 10 years from now, we're going to be talking about deals with Hamas and still not an ability to have an offensive in the north because it hasn't been resolved in Gaza? What's going to change that's going to allow us to move forward here?
I think that if in the coming days there is no deal, there is no deal. And then the US, Israel will have to realize that there will be no solution. And then one of two things: or Iran will shoot at us, or Hezbollah will shoot, or we are proactive and we attack. So there will be a moment where it will be clear that there is no deal, and then really the question is who attacks first. And I think that this time we better be the ones that are proactive and do what we need to do. And this really requires from the cabinet, from the prime minister, to show leadership, not to be hesitant, to be resolute, strong, and do what is good for Israel. What is good for Israel is attacking fiercely Hezbollah and also dealing with the nuclear plans of Iran.
And would you say that U.S. support is the primary reservation on escalations on a preemptive strike against Hezbollah or Iran?
I think that, as I said, we need to be able to explain that if there is no deal and if the U.S. cannot reach the point where they can get Hezbollah to withdraw, and I don't see how exactly they're going to do that, since they don't want to use power, they don't want to threaten militarily. And this gives us not many choices. I mean, what will bring our citizens back? The citizens are not going back to a reality where Hezbollah is on our borders. This is not a deal. The Ministry of Defense understands that. The Prime Minister understands that. I think the IDF understands that. So there have been ongoing talks with Lebanon for months and months. I didn't see any change. And if there won't be a change in the coming weeks, we need to do what we need to do. We need to fight. And I expect the government to understand that and remember that there are citizens in the north that need to have a solution, how they're going back home.
100%, 100%. And General, another question that's coming in is with regards to Hezbollah's rockets versus their precision-guided missiles. Are you able to address this past Sunday? It seemed to be mostly rockets and not their precision-guided missiles. And in the future, is there a much greater threat that Hezbollah presents that we didn't see on Sunday?
Right. Precision-guided missiles are a very big threat. And Israel has dealt for many years in trying to slow down the buildup of these capabilities, attacking many convoys in Syria with components that are supposed to help build this missile capability. I'm not sure we know exactly how many they have. They had a few hundreds, maybe 1,000. Maybe we'll find out they have more. But it's definitely a danger, and this is why we cannot allow a reality where they shoot first. This is why we need to be proactive.
Now, here in Israel, there's this new term of October 6th thinking, right? Living in that bubble of believing that we are safe, believing all will be okay, and we have deterrence. General, I'm curious if you could just share quickly the extent to which you think Israeli society is in October 6th thinking and in Israeli leadership is in October 6th thinking, or have we all learned the lessons and we're living in the October 8th world?
I think that the vast majority of the Israeli society is definitely not on the October 6th thinking. Israeli society is in a completely different place, most of it, not all of them, but the vast majority have a much clearer understanding of the challenges, what are the challenges, who are our enemies, what do they want to do to us. And this is why the society demands victory. They want to see the government proactive, and I think that after yesterday, we are seeing a whole new level of pressure on the government to show strength and do what is needed to do. So even from a political point of view, the messages to the Prime Minister, we're not going to agree to weakness. We're not going to agree to containing the situation. We're not going to agree to Israel fighting just for Tel Aviv and not for the north. I think this message has resonate in the Prime Minister's office and also the Ministry of Defense, that this pressure will amount until the point that Israel will have to do what it needs to do.
Brigadier General Amir Avivi, thank you so much for sharing all of this with us. Thank you to all of our viewers, all of our supporters, both tuning in here on Zoom and those of you who watch on YouTube. And if you're watching on YouTube, consider subscribing to the channel to allow us to really get the truth out there. We will be back with you tomorrow, 10 a.m. Eastern Time, 5 p.m. here in Israel. Until then, stay safe, stay strong. Take care, everyone.